all talk about how to have a more balanced life, but making that happen is easier said than done. Here with the 3 skills you need to help you find balance is psychologist and podcaster, Dr. Daniel Baughn. Dr. Baughn, it's always so great to see you.
You too, Gail. Thanks again for having me back.
Absolutely, and I see you brought a little prop with you today.
I did. We're going to use this in just a few moments.
Okay,
because we're going to talk about these skills.
Yeah, so let's talk about the practical skills. You say, though, before we get to those, you say there are 2 buckets. Things that we have control over and things that we do not have control over.
Yes. So when we're talking about this skill of kind of like finding balance or finding these ways of navigating, you know, back and forth, because really it's not just finding one spot, it's about learning our way to kind of find and recenter ourselves regularly. One of the key things you want to recognize is, you know, life tends to fall in these 2 different buckets. These things I have direct control over, but you know, some examples of that can be things like, you know, maybe the way that you drive your car to work or something, or if you, you know, when you choose to turn on a TV show or watch it in the evening, that's something you have control over. Versus the things that we don't have control over are things that kind of just happen to us, like when it rains outside, or sometimes when we're not feeling motivated, right? Or when these thoughts go through our mind of like, oh gosh, am I gonna get good sleep tonight or not? Or these things, like we can't really control what's happening in there. We just kind of experience it. And each bucket requires different kinds of strategies, which we're going to talk about today.
Okay, and you also say that we should ask ourselves if we're suffering and struggling or living a rich, full, and fulfilled life.
Yes, bingo. So really the question that you want to ask yourself is what I'm currently doing. So whatever, you know, challenge that you're trying to find balance around, is what I'm doing currently working to help me to get that rich, full, and meaningful life, or is it not? And if it is working for you, that's great. We would say probably do more of that. But if it's not working for you, that's when we'd say, that's not working. It's not as workable as I want it to be. And that's where these 3 strategies kind of come in.
All right, let's talk about the 3 skills you need to find balance.
Yes, absolutely. So the first one here is to be open. And what I mean by be open is being open to kind of like the present moment. And these can be things like using meditation, or if that's not a good fit for you, maybe something along the lines of like yoga. But it's also being aware that there's a difference between our thinking mind and our observing kind of self. So that's where I have an example.
Okay.
So I have with us just here a Post-it note and a pen. And I want to ask you, what's a thought that maybe comes through your mind that maybe you find bothersome in some way?
A thought that I find bothersome. There's one that's at the front of my mind, but I'm trying to use, let's see. Is it a thought in my life, or is it just a general thought?
I would say in general, like things like, for example, for me, if I can't sleep, I would say, I can't sleep.
That is the number one.
Yeah.
Like, even the fear of not, like, what my day's going to look like without sleep, because I do suffer from...
Absolutely.
But I mean, again, you've been on the show so much, and I will tell you, I use your techniques, and they really do work.
Sure.
But yeah, not getting enough sleep is one of them.
It's a common one, like I can't sleep or something like that, right? And so the difference between like your observing self and your thinking self is recognizing that when I have this thought, like I can't sleep, you know, sometimes when we wake up in the middle of the night, and you know, we've talked about those activities you can do when you're tired but not sleepy, like, you know, folding laundry or doing a jigsaw puzzle or a coloring book, those types of things. And we have these thoughts, and we're like, oh, what can I do with that thought? You know, recognizing the difference between your thinking self and your observing self is like taking that thought and putting it right here.
Okay.
And saying that, you know what, can I still do that activity even though I put this thought right here? It hasn't changed anywhere, hasn't gone away.
I love that.
But we are still able to, maybe I'm still able to fold my laundry in the middle of the night, maybe I'm still able to do the coloring book, or maybe I'm still able to have that conversation with that person that I'm kind of like really bothered by.
Yeah.
But I can put the thought right here, and it has a space for myself versus being consumed by that thought. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. I love that, because it's right, because I was going to say one of the things that you cannot control are the other people in your lives.
Totally.
And you can't step in and make them do things, but you know, you could maybe put the thought and the feeling. So by the act of putting the thought, putting the feeling, by the act of doing that, is that just like leaving space for it, but continue on the journey that you want to be on.
Exactly. So you're allowing space for the thought to just simply be there, and you're also saying, okay, the second piece too is these values, doing what matters. Because doing what matters might be, in this, we use the example of, you know, having a conversation with someone that's kind of difficult. Doing the thing that matters might be saying, you know what, in spite of this person being a challenge for me, I still want to make sure that we talk about this and this and this.
Okay.
And it's those values and that committed action which is super important, because sometimes these thoughts can kind kind of get in our mind and kind of totally take us down a pathway of like, oh, I can't do that thing. But you actually can do that thing. It's just a matter of finding a right space for it. So that's the second part, is doing what's important. And then the third kind of key skill is absolutely being just more aware that you can separate yourself from some of these thoughts sometimes. So a good example of this, and I use this a lot with my clients, there's this exercise called a leaves on a stream exercise, and lots of people have done this on YouTube. But what's really kind of important about it is you learn to recognize that this is, you know, who I am and what I'm thinking about myself. A common one that I see is, gosh, I might think that I'm a failure in some way, or I might think that I really messed up that thing at work. And recognizing that that's a thought I'm having, and then separating that from who I am. Saying that, you know what, I can still have that thought, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I am a failure. Maybe that one situation was, you know, unique to those circumstances. So it's learning to put space between those things so that you can see them just more objectively, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. This is why I love it when you come on Bloom, because you always give us so much food for thought and so many practical things that we can apply to our life. So thank you, Dr. Baughn.
You're welcome, Gail.
Absolutely.